Direct from the edge of the lunatic fringe, it's the Raleigh James Show.
Friday night, the time is right for trivia, and in the first hour, we're going to be talking to someone who has written 50 stories, 50 years in radio, with 50 and more years of first-hand experience at this, and I'm talking Brian Wilson here. And this is the first time, by the way, I've used the guest line in forever, and so we're kind of, John and I are both sitting here kind of crossing our fingers saying, is this going to even work? And we assume it will, but in the meantime, if you go to Rollye.net, ROLLYE.net, you'll get a link to 50 stories, 50 years in radio that Brian Wilson has written. And the only thing I'll warn you is you're going to start to read it and there will evaporate your time because you'll keep reading, especially if you're a big-time radio fan. So, as I say, keeping those fingers crossed and hoping that I'm talking to Brian Wilson. Are you there, Brian?
Fine.
Don't even go there. that's
okay.
cruel.
All right. It's
cruel.
fucking great. You sound great. You all sound great. Everything's great.
Yeah, cruel and unusual punishment. I'll tell you what. You know, I was just before, and of course I read 50 stories when you first sent it to me, and I finished it in 2 days, which is basically all I did was read it. And it's absolutely free on Kindle. Why are you so generous?
That's not my decision. Apparently, that is a gratuity that Amazon puts forth without any discussion whatsoever with the author. And the next thing you know what tiny profits may be going out for the 63 cents you get from a Kindle version is just off into the universe. So hooray for them, and maybe they'll grow Mr. Bezos' hair back or something. I have no idea.
I doubt it. And it probably won't make the half of his fortune he just lost with the announcement of his divorce either. But that said, I contributed to the kitty by buying a hard copy, which I advise because it's really a keeper. And when you do things on Kindle, they don't last. They're not around. But this is something that you can go back and read again and again because the 50 stories are all different from one another and quite unique. Some will make you laugh, some will almost make you cry. But it's a great inside look at radio. So thanks for writing it.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Coming from you, that is a hell of a compliment.
Now, it's interesting because one of the things I did before I got on the air, I thought, well, let me just go ahead and search Brian and put radio in parentheses and talk radio in parentheses so I don't get the musician. We'll talk about that because that's one of your stories, more than one of your stories. But in any event, first thing that came up was some talk show host who's now in Nashville. And I'm thinking, how dare he? So what do we know about him? Anything?
Yes. As a matter of fact, when I was on in Washington at our WWRC with Bob Madigan as Brian and Bob, the last of my 3 partnership incarnations, that Brian Wilson, was on the Washington Fox affiliate and making occasional appearances on the Fox network. And it was interesting because we were on simultaneously, and I would get calls on the air saying, I just saw you on TV, and now you're on the radio. How do you do that? I called him after this happened, I don't know, a dozen or so times, and he lived up in Columbia, Maryland, where I lived, and apparently not too far away. And and he said, I get the same thing.
Sure.
And I said, well, you know what would be a great idea? Would be you come over here and do the show with Bob on April the 1st, and I'll go over and do whatever the hell it is you do, over at Fox, and we wouldn't even have to blink. You're not Brian Wilson. Yes, I am. You're not Brian. Yes, I am. Whatever. Yeah. And of course, his program director would have nothing of that.
Of course.
Typical of TV anal retentiveness and so on, and so that went down the crapper. He subsequently went over to WMAL and was there for a little while, but apparently the same personality aberrations that got him canned from Fox, got him canned from WMAL. He was on the beach for a pretty good while, and somehow he landed a gig over in, I think it's Nashville, and that's the last I've really heard of him or anything he's done to elevate himself into anything. I mean, your mention of him is the first person I've heard in the business that made any recognition of the fact that he was there. So that's really about it. Although there are a couple of dozen other Brian Wilsons. One Brian Wilson is in production, apparently quite damn good at it, somewhere the last I heard in Phoenix, or Dallas, or somewhere. And that's really about it. But it is rather discouraging that there's an awful lot of Brian Wilsons getting credit for all the work I did, including writing all those great rock and roll songs.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. And my favorite is the hotel suite you got with that mix-up. So if you want to succinctly tell us about that, I want everybody to read it, but you can kind of do the Cliff Notes version.
Well, I'd rather read it, but no, there are a lot of great stories from doing that. The hotel suite took place out in Sacramento. I was flown out there to interview for a gig at KFBK, and I wish I could remember the name of the PD at the time, but it's no matter. They set me up at a hotel B&B type place not far from the Capitol building. And the limo from the airport took me there, and I walked in, and there was a fellow behind the counter, and I said, "I've got reservations, and what's your name?" "Brian Wilson." And at first it didn't register until I handed him the American Express card, and then he was kind of stultified, and he, like you say, just the Cliff Notes version was he was mortified, that Brian Wilson was there, and not all that unusual. What the hell, it's California. Why Brian Wilson wouldn't be in California? Are you here for the radio station? Yes, I'm here for the radio. Are you going to do a concert? Well, I'd rather not say. And I just played along. He took me to my room, which was okay, but no, this has to be wrong. This is absolutely wrong. I'm very, no, come with me. This can't be your room. And he takes me down to, I guess, was the bridal suite. I only say that because it had a trapeze, and we go in, and it had a. I remember the shower. The shower was big enough for a car wash, and. Anyway, there were some payoffs and so on as the couple of days I was there wore on, but it was not the first or last time that just by saying I was Brian Wilson got me all sorts of things that I should have gotten anyway because of my radio status, but obviously it was because of Surfer Girl and Little Deuce Coupe and all that other stuff.
And it's such a wonderful mistake because they can't correct it, because they know in their heart of hearts that if they were to say, "Oh, we mixed you up with somebody famous," that wouldn't fly. So therefore,
that's exactly right. There was the little things though that really I don't think I wrote about the occasion in the book. There were so many things that I wrote and rewrote and deleted and added and so on. But we did a concert in the guy I was teamed with in Baltimore hosted a concert that the Beach Boys did there back in the mid '80s, the late '80s. And we were backstage, and the promoter comes out, and Mike Love and the rest of the guys come out, and okay, we're ready to go. Blah blah blah. This is the guy who's going to introduce you. Mike. This is Brian Wilson. And man, the darts and the hostility and the bullets and. That were leveled at me as like this was some sort of a joke. And I said, look, it's my name, all right? Your guy's 14 months older than I am. He's Brian Carl, I'm Brian Martin, blah, blah, blah. I know you've had all this BS up in Connecticut with the copyright lawsuit and so on, but that's who I am, so get real.
Right.
And then a couple of years later, I was up at Z100 in New York, and we did it again at the Meadowlands, another concert. The Beach Boys again. Out comes the Mike Love, the rest of the guys. Out comes the promoter. They were going to do the introductions again, and Mike, this is Brian Wilson. And it almost got him, but then he said, "Hey, Aren't you the guy from Baltimore? Yeah. Well, everything was okay, but there was a lot of animosity and hard feelings at that particular time, between the two of them, and I just happened to be there with the right name at the time, and it was cathartic.
Yeah, to say the least. Now, one of the things that, I thought I knew you pretty darn well, but one of the things that I didn't know, I figured you were like most of us, where we kind of knew by the time we were 12 what we were going to do for a living. Radio didn't dawn on you till a little later.
Yeah, I know. It never entered my mind. It was just not something I ever thought about. Nobody ever complimented me on my voice or whatever. I did some plays in high school, like everybody did, I guess, and or most people did. They were extroverted, and it wasn't until my sophomore year in college at a party in Baton Rouge that a guy came up to me and said, "You've got a great voice. Have you ever thought about going into radio?" No, actually, I'm in pre-law. I'm going into law school. Why? And as the book brings out, he said that he worked at a radio station that was looking for somebody, and it paid $5 a week more than I was making flipping burgers at the 24-hour bowling alley in Baton Rouge. And I went out and I read for the part and got it, and that pretty much the rest is history.
Yeah, and that is so interesting because, like I say, most of us, we might have been in drama class, but what we really were was staying at home to listen to the Night Jock. And, by the time...
Yes. And you know what? The guy that was on in Baton Rouge at the time in 1965, 6, his name was, I think his name was Bill Cheney. He did a show called Night Flight, probably one of a million that had that name. And that was when folk music was huge.
Oh, yeah.
And I was on campus during the day, when I wasn't on the air and so on. And I loved that stuff. And turned out to have gotten around to have actually met and spent some time with the Chad Mitchell Trio and the Kingston Trio and the New Christie Minstrels and all the rest of that, who came to LSU for concerts and so on. And it was a great time and a great experience to be able to experience to marry the two of being a jock, being a student, and playing that music at night. I mean, I owned the campus. I mean, all 32,000 students out there were mine from 9 until midnight, and I played and then this new guy came along. What was his name? Bob Dylan. Yeah, Bob Dylan, and that changed everything. So it was an interesting time.
Well, sure, and radio was really looking forward to that folk stuff. I remember in about 62, stations started changing formats, and they called it Hootenanny, of all things.
Yes, But didn't the Limelighters had an album by that name, I believe.
And that's the deal was they didn't want to be rock and roll because they weren't able to sell the advertisers. The kids were all listening, but the major advertisers weren't buying, so they thought that Hootenanny was going to be their saving grace, and of course, that lasted about half a minute overall, but it was huge on college campuses, so you really did get in at the right time.
Yeah, that was. But I didn't. Now you are the foremost radio historian that I know when it comes to formats and stations. And what you just said is news to me. I did not know that there ever was a station anywhere that dedicated their entire format to folk music.
Oh, did they ever? In fact. WCKR Whacker Radio 610. It was WIOD before that and after it, but when it was Whacker, it had been top 40, and it hadn't been doing well in terms of the kids loved it, but it really hadn't been getting much in the way of advertisers, and QAM was just cleaning their clock. And so it was that at the beginning of 63, they announced, we're going Hootenanny. And what they did, the only asset they had was a night jock guy named Rick Shaw, who QAM snapped up immediately, and basically that sealed QAM's dominance forever. And within a year or so, Whacker went away, and the wonderful Isle of Dreams, WIOD, returned. So, but that Hootenanny was all about, and it's so funny because here they're saying they're not getting advertisers with rock and roll, and you mentioned the Chad Mitchell Trio. You listen to some of those words, and that's about as subversive as it gets. You'd think that if an advertiser was actually hearing it, they'd be more turned off than top 40. But
I want to tell you something. I did not write about this in the book, but down in Baton Rouge in the mid '60s like that. Those songs that the Chad Mitchell Trio did that were subversive. They had the John Birch Society,
right? Barry's Boys. Don't forget Barry's Boys.
Barry's Boys. And so the general manager took the record.
Oh no!
And a nail.
Oh no!
And scratched through the cuts on the albums that had those songs, along with lots of inscriptions all over the jacket. Do not play, not for air. Do not play, not for air.
Oh yeah.
And then made sure that nobody would ever accidentally cue up Barry's Boys or anything like that. It was. It kind of led to the story about Noah that I write about in the book with Bill Cosby and the Morning Man and all the rest. It was an archaic time in our history for both radio and the country back there in the '60s that radio had the power, radio personalities had the power and the influence and so on to be able to come in and do things like that. And if you read about Noah in the book, you know that I almost got canned for playing Bill Cosby's trilogy on Noah, offending the sensibilities of the hard-shell Southern Baptists in Baton Rouge, who called and complained to the Morning Man, Catfish Bill Carrigan, who then called me drunk as a skunk at 11 o'clock and told me I'd be fired the next day because he was getting calls from his listeners saying how offended they were by me playing this black guy making fun of the Bible.
You know, I read that story as I read all of them, and I will say that's the one that caught me completely off guard because I never had any inkling that Noah could have been a controversy. And, of course, that was on Cosby's I Started Out as a Child, and the whole album is hilarious, and never once did it occur to me that there could be anything that would be in any way controversial about this. But what I found funny was when you met Bill Cosby, you weren't the only one.
No, and that was 20 years later. This goes from 1965, 6, whatever, to 1985, 6 in Baltimore when he came in to do a concert or do an appearance. And I was appalled. I mean, he knew right off. Right. When I told him, I got fired, almost got fired because Noah.
Yeah. It's the Lord,
right
Noah.
there.
Yeah, and you think in terms of what we hear on the air today, and yes, of course, times change, but it is such a complete shift to think that anybody could be offended by "It's the Lord, Noah," but apparently you weren't alone. So Baton Rouge, which is interesting because it's certainly not big market radio, but you got a big college town and all that. From there, you went to
Atlanta,
which is big.
Well, actually, I took a little side trip to Houston. But we generally don't talk about that. ABC bought a couple of stations there, an AM/FM station. I was on the AM, KXYZ, and it was pretty terrible. And my wife was not thrilled with the market, and we had a couple of kids and blah, blah, blah. And I ran into my old general manager who begged me to come back to WIBR and one thing, so we did. So in reality, even though there was that little major market sidebar in the late 60s, it was in 77. I teamed up with this guy in Baton Rouge, and we were on the air for about 7-8 months in Baton Rouge, and just tore up the town and the ratings and the competition and the advertisers, and started a nightclub act and everything else. And next thing you know, we got a call from Bud Polasek, the GM at Z93 in Atlanta, and hey, we'll double your salary. I said, say no more.
Right. I'm packing. So that was the first team, Ross and Wilson.
Yes.
And people remember that to this day in Atlanta. You're still a hero in Atlanta radio.
Yeah, it is kind of astounding. I wish we were a hero. I wish we were heroes there for the right reasons. But I'm afraid that a rumor, a story, a bad joke that somehow got attached to us that write about in the book. I mean, if there's anything infamous about anything that I ever did, while some of them I would like to think are more esoteric or more appealing from a structural, principled standpoint for my political views, and when I got into talk radio and so on, nothing tops the story of Another One Bites the Dust.
Yes.
In Atlanta. That
yes.
really is alive to this day. You can look it up. I mean, it's all over the internet. If you Google it, and it's. I mean, I fight that battle to this day. I got into a skirmish on Facebook a couple of weeks ago with some asshat who wanted to insist that he heard it. He was driving down the road. He was amazed and appalled. He couldn't believe it, and so on.
Right.
It was similar to the incident that I write about in the book about what happened. But yeah, Atlanta was a great market. You've been there, I've been there, and not just Atlanta, but I mean there are those markets that love you and you love them, and there's a fusion, there's an excitement and electricity that just transcends everything. And once you walk into the studio and turn on the mic until your shift is over, it's just magic, and that was Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. And from Atlanta right to New York.
Yeah. You know what's amazing about all that is there was a lot I had to leave out.
Oh, sure.
And one thing I discovered about writing books, it's not all that easy, even if you want to tell the truth. And there was a lot of stuff, some of which I know you know, that is not in the story. And the story is concerning that transition. Still, it was a thrill of a lifetime. I mean, if whatever business you're in, whatever occupation you have, whatever goals to which you aspire, to be called by, what was that movie I'm terrible on names of stars and so on, but it was a movie about baseball, and this guy gets called to go to the majors, and so on. And it's just that moment when you're recognized for what you do and what you've done, that you're qualified for the tippy top of your profession. And the day that call came in after we got off the air at Z93, and it was the program director at WABC in New York, which for people who are not enamored with East Coast radio, I mean, this WABC was always the top of the heap, pick of the pack, cream of the crop, the ultimate, the mecca, the mountain for top 40 disc jockeys to aspire. The guy calls and says he wants to talk to us about coming up there to do Morning Drive, the prime time radio slot in all of radio. And of course, we turned him down based on a previous engagement. But like I said to my partner, Ross Britton at the time, I said, look, he was aghast and appalled. And I said, look, when they want you, they come get you. Just like Bud came down to Baton Rouge to get us out of there to come to Atlanta, this guy, Jay Clark, is going to call, and he's going to come back. He wants us. He'll come get us. And he did, and we did, and we went to New York. It was pretty heady stuff.
Oh, yeah. Now, the only problem with something like that is that prior to that, you have goals. You know, the big time is elusive, but you're going to make it, and you're working toward that. Now you're working at the ultimate of goals. What's next? Yeah.
The problem with that is twofold. First of all, me personally, I did not aspire to WABC New York. I did not aspire to New York. I was born and raised up there.
Right.
I grew up 27 miles from the Lincoln Tunnel. I saw, Bye Bye Birdie and My Fair Lady and How to Succeed in Business. I went to the World's Fair, the Empire State Building. I've been there, done that. It didn't hold any magic to me, even from an occupational standpoint. I knew that it would be, a crowning touch, but we were having a ball in Atlanta. I was a happy guy. Atlanta was growing and booming, and all these people were moving in from all over the South and Southeast to come to work at IBM and Eastern Airlines and Delta and Beltel and Coca-Cola and all the rest of that, and they were all 20, 23, 25, 28, 30 years old, and they were all gorgeous and handsome, and disco was the big thing, and there were all these discos all around town, and all the girls were on the pill, and all the guys had fast cars, and you couldn't ask for anything better. And to be the number one morning show on the number one CHR station in town, and all the other things that we were involved in, including doing stand up at these discos 3, 4, 5 nights a week, it was magic.
Sure.
Why do I want to go to New York? Why do I want to go up there with the traffic and all the rest of that just to be able to say I was on WABC? Great, another set of bosses, another set of suits, another set of people trying to tell you what to do or not do on the air. It just wasn't all that. It wasn't all that attractive. I take it or leave it. Didn't matter,
So,
but there was a blessing that the industry put on you for having climbed the mountain. That. And there you were up on Everest, and how many people ever got the call to replace Dan Ingram in Morning Drive on WABC in New York? It just didn't happen that often. So when the money and the terms and all the rest of that finally, came down, didn't really matter, how much fun I was having in Atlanta. I mean, you had to go. You had to go. You had to climb. You had to put your flag on the top of that mountain and say that you did it.
So more than anything, would you say it was the money?
Yeah, okay. Pretty much. There was a lot of money and the prestige. At the time, this was the waning hours of the golden days of WABC. It was probably the last, let me see, 18 months, 24 months. From the time we got there until the time that they pulled the plug on music radio, the incredibly dominant top 40 format that was the standard of the industry for all those years, and went talk.
And you stayed. Now that's the incredible part.
Our last book, the winter book, before they made the announcement, the morning show beat Don Imus. That was our big competition.
Right.
And so on.
Back then, that meant a lot.
Back and forth. We beat him in some demographic cells. He beat us in others, especially males, 25, 54, and so on. And that last book in 82, I guess it was, 82, 83, we beat him across the board. And that was when the decision was made. We're going to pull the plug on this thing. Let's keep them. We're going to get rid of Ron Lundy and Dan Ingram and Johnny Donovan and Howard Hoffman and everybody else. But we'll keep these guys. These guys apparently have some promise, some potential in the market. And we survived the cut.
So with that timing, I got to ask, you were right there in the middle of the debacle that became Super Radio.
Well, what was interesting about Super Radio, we were supposed to be on that, along with Jay Thomas and Dan and Ron and I don't know, a couple other guys that were in the New York market, and some guys in L.A. Who I could name the names, but I'm not sure that they were. I don't know if it was Rick Dees or Don Steele or Charlie Tuna. I don't know if those guys were part of it or not. I really wasn't that intimately familiar with who was the big iron, on the West Coast at the time. Even though we knew Rick Dees, we had done a couple of shows with Rick Dees, but that was right across the street. For people familiar with Manhattan, the ABC building was at 54th and 6th, and catty corner to that was the Burlington building. Across the street was the Hilton, the New York Hilton. Across the street was the another hotel, the Worc Hotel.
The Worc was
the
there,
Beatles
and then on 7th you had the Stage Deli and the Americana and Tower 53. So
exactly. Well, the whole Super Radio thing was taking place on the upper floors of the Burlington building.
Okay.
And they had, I mean, if you walked in there, it looked like you were on the set of Star Trek and Star Wars and Flash Gordon and everything else. The newest of every possible piece of radio broadcasting equipment was there, and the engineers were all knocking down the top-selling top 40 songs to 3 minutes. That was there. In fact, one of our engineers, Debbie Iacovelli, worked her other shift over there, and that's what she did. She was editing "Hey Jude" and these things all down so that they would not be longer than 3 minutes, because that was apparently going to be the secret. Part of the secret of Super Radio was not only were we going to have these huge names that were going to be on the air coast to coast, every station that signed up to carry it, but all these songs that everybody wanted to hear would be edited down to fit into the format, into the time slots and the stop sets and everything else, but hopefully not noticeably enough so that people would be offended. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald or other great bathroom songs were not...
No, 3 minutes. Yeah, you missed the actual wreck, but that's okay. It was bad enough they were shortening them, but at least they didn't decide to speed them up.
That's true. Yeah, that was left for another time and another station. But no one knows is that, because they never heard it, is that it was less than 24 hours before it was supposed to debut on the 4th of July. That what was the name? Rule pulled the plug. Yeah, and said, "Nah, not going to do it." And all that time, money, investment, and so on, all that equipment. Well, they sold off the equipment. That was no big deal. But all those contracts had to be bought out, and it never made a light of day or the sound or nothing. It was just. And
they did a lot of advertising in the industry prior to this. They were in broadcasting every week saying Super Radio is coming, and at the NAB they had a big party, and they had. I remember they handed out pens, and then they handed out the contracts for stations to sign up, and their line was pretty much, now you can have one or two things. You can have Super Radio just by signing the contract, or you can have a pen. So about a year later, I ran into Rick Sklar and I said, "Still got the pen, Rick?"
Yeah, it's a great story, but especially if you're in radio, and the thing that always amazed me was not just the time and effort, but the money that they pissed away on that project and didn't even blink. It was what all came back to me was I should have asked for more money when I was negotiating the contract. Yeah. If they had enough money to sit there and blow off on something like Super Radio, I should have asked for double what they were paying me, and they were paying me pretty well. So it was kind of remarkable. But the ultimate lesson, to me at least, was that the intelligence that permeated the upper floors of the ABC building was not nearly what everyone thought it was.
Well, that was in evidence by ABC Talk Radio, to say the least. I remember she's gone now, but the late Dr. Tony Grant, I remember driving through some place like Omaha and hearing her talking to some tearful woman who was living in a trailer and obviously had no money and was being abused, and she was comparing it to dating one of the Everly Brothers. And I thought, this is just not going to fly in mid-America. And
well, you can cut me off if this is a little bit too racy for the audience, but the one I recall was we had to stay in town for something. I was driving back to New Jersey, and I was going up the West Side Highway, and she was on, and it was essentially it was afternoon drive on the East Coast,
right?
And she got a call from a woman who was very distraught because she had happened into her daughter's bedroom and caught her masturbating with a Coke bottle. And she took the call very seriously, and I'm seeing cars, around me on these sides, and they're kind of swerving. Those kind of like, oh my God, oh, there's a listener, there's a listener, there's a listener, there's a listener. That was just not something that the New York market, for all of its alleged sophistication and hard-boiled everything, was prepared for. maybe in L.A. at 2:00 in the afternoon, hooray! But not so much Manhattan at
right.
5:15 or
and
whatever.
this is why I never excelled at advice shows, because the first thing I would have said is, did she know Fatty Arbuckle?
Yeah, it was. Those were remarkable times, and I chose not to write about that one. But there were. I've kind of thought about doing another 25 or
right.
another 32 or the one. But as I started to say earlier, there are just some things that you. It's not that I can't write about them because of my modesty or my Puritan upbringing, but there are other people involved, and they're still alive, and they know lawyers, and you just
absolutely.
Gotta be.
No, I'm with you there. I always said that I wasn't going to write until more people were dead.
Yeah, well, maybe I ought to just put everything on hold until that happens.
Well, they're dropping like flies right now. You probably don't have to wait too long.
Pretty much. I'm healthy. I'm okay with it.
And that's good to hear. So so Ross and Wilson, and then of course I have a listener, Nick in Baltimore, who I think Brian and O'Brien, and he's not alone, obviously, are the at least the penultimate for radio for him. And boy, that worked in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I don't know that unless you are intimately acquainted with radio, I don't know that I got the point across that well in the book. There was so much I couldn't say, and there was things that I didn't want to say about that union. I tried to give the basics to explain just how Brian and O'Brien came to be, but the remarkable part is, and you don't have to, as you so kindly pointed out at the beginning, you don't have to have ever heard Ross and Wilson, Brian and O'Brien, Brian and Bob, or just Brian Wilson in any incarnation on the air. The stories are what the stories are. They all happened exactly the way I wrote them. Granted, there might be a couple of items left out, but there was nothing embellished.
Right.
And it gives some insight, if nothing else, hopefully in a humorous way, to the things that happen behind the mic in radio. And the Brian and O'Brien act in Baltimore, I never wanted it to be that way. I wasn't hired for that. The guy that hired me was a big Ross and Wilson fan out of New York. Had tried to hire us into Washington, and that didn't work. And after he got me to sign on the dotted line in Baltimore, told me I was going to be teamed with this guy.
Yeah, that's happy news. That's a good way to start.
Yeah, and I'll never forget it. We were down at Harbor Place prior to everybody getting shot there, and he said, and he told me that, he says, I think that you guys could be bigger than Ross and Wilson. Well, the whole separation between Ross and me is not a pleasant story, and I did not write about it in any great detail. But to say that we were going to be another Ross, that's say, and I'll shoot you in your other foot, or I'll how about a nice root canal or something like that. I was adamantly against it, and without gilding the lily of the story, as I tried to detail it in the book, I did go on the air with this guy. I definitely wanted him fired before after the first show, after the first week, and the program director refused, despite the fact he had made me that offer. And instead of being the yucca-puck, off-the-rails personality that I played within the context of the Ross and Wilson act, I became the angry man, the disapproving parent, the curmudgeon of Brian and O'Brien. The thing about it is that the audience thought that was the act.
Right, of course.
It wasn't an act.
I know, yeah, exactly. And no one knew it better than O'Brien, I'm sure.
You're absolutely right on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I hated the guy.
Yeah.
And I didn't like working with him. He was young, stupid, uneducated, irresponsible, on drugs, on booze.
Oh,
I didn't want anything to do with him. He ruined more bits. He didn't understand the mechanics of comedy. He was a good jock. I'll give him that. He was a good jock. He could talk up a record. He could hit a 12-second, post. He could all the rest of that, do time and temp and call letters, and do the 12th caller, all the things that your standard CHR jock can do. But as a partner in what I wanted to be, as sophisticated, intelligent, rambunctiously funny as Ross and Wilson had been, it was a train wreck. And because he wasn't going to be terminated, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be terminated, not the way my contract was written.
Right.
It was like there was no holds barred, and as a consequence, the outright animosity from me to him, and my budding verbal skills to use them in that application, the audience just thought it was a riot. They thought this was the funniest thing they ever heard. This is so great. And it wasn't just reserved for him. I took the mayor, ultimately the governor, Schaefer over the coals, the Baltimore Sun, whatever, our competition on other stations, the people up on TV Hill. Didn't matter. I didn't want to be there. I thought Baltimore was the scrunch bucket of, to borrow Stevens' term, of radio and whatever. And as a result, the show was, for the market, for the time, for the conditions it's on, was perfection. And just as Ross and Wilson still have an afterlife at Z93 or in Atlanta, not at Z93 per se. Bryant and O'Brien, if you were 15 years old in Baltimore in 1984 or older, we were the show. It was the show.
Yeah, you were heroes in Dundalk.
Yes, Heroes in Dundalk. That's another great series of stories I tried to bring out in the book, from Bruley, across the river from Baton Rouge in Louisiana, to Snellville, right. Which was a small town outside of Atlanta, to Dundalk in Baltimore. New York was the only market that was spared, and I had to invent a town for that, Moss Creek.
Right.
Because the New York market was just, it was too vast, and there was too much separation.
Right, exactly. If you're making,
people in the Bronx didn't give a rat's butt about what was going on in Wayne, New Jersey, where I was born, and the people in Wayne, New Jersey didn't care about Yonkers or Westchester or Manhattan or anything else as far as that. But I had to find something that would transfer from one to the other, and just not to leave any dangling participles for the audience. When I came up to go to WABC, I had an apartment off of Columbus Circle at Central Park, and I couldn't stand it. I was raised on a farm in New Jersey, and the Dempsey dumpster demolition derby that they ran every morning at 4 o'clock, and the ambulances and all the rest of that. After about 6 months, I broke my lease and moved out to New Jersey, which I had to explain to the audience, and so much of our off-air life was fodder for the show. And everybody wondered, well, where are you moving to? Are you going back to Wayne? You going to Passaic, Fort Lauderdale, Canada, good cheese, whatever. And so I had to invent a town to make sure that I wouldn't be overrun by people who weren't exactly the biggest fans of the show.
Right.
And those who were, so we invented Moss Creek.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now, you, like all of us, have committed more than a few, well, put it finally, faux pas on the air. And everyone has stories. But the sense of timing on your one story was absolutely hilarious. And I had told you off the air that I just laughed out loud about this because here you didn't realize your mic was on. So let's talk about your helicopter traffic gal. Well,
this was in the mid-'80s in Baltimore, and if I recall correctly, it was a day that my partner was either out drunk or suspended or fired or one or the other. But we had I had an excellent board op who's actually now a star in his own right out in L.A. He was the board op producer, whatever, and he had microphone access. Anyway, we also had a girl, Barb London, who did our traffic reports, and Barb would go up in a helicopter every morning. I referred to her as our pair in the air, and which was not alliteration that was not missed by most. But this particular morning, it was not the best of weather. It was cloudy and overcast and all the rest of that. And she called in and said she wasn't going up. The weather was wouldn't the helicopter couldn't hail it. Blah blah blah. And I mentioned on the air that we would still have traffic reports this morning, but our pair in the air would be on the ground because of the inclement weather and the grounding of the helicopter. I immediately got a call from a guy of some means who said he had a helicopter and he'd be happy to take her up and fly around and provide the traffic reports. I said, great. So I had John call Barb. I said, everything's cool. Get to the airport. This guy's going to take you up. Well, I don't know. I mean, does he have the radio frequencies we need? Yes, he's got the radio frequencies that we need for you to call in. Okay, click. Do the show. A few minutes later, phone rings. Is Barb calling back? Well, I don't know that I can get ready in time to... He's waiting for you. He's waiting for you. Don't worry about it. He'll wait for you. You got 20 minutes to get to the airport. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. More show. Barb calls back. Well, I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can make it in time. I'm just now getting it. Look, just get to the airport and don't worry about a thing and so on. Well, now all these messages are being relayed from the telephone, answered by John, the producer, and relayed to me by our intercom, because I'm in a separate studio. A separate studio where I can do what I have to do without being interrupted by the machinations of what John has to do to play commercials and all the rest of that. So I'm constantly being interrupted by John telling me that Barb called, who said that she can't do this and she'll be late for that and she's not sure about something else. And I'm trying to do a show and answer the phone and get the records, the music ready and put in drops and all the rest of this. And finally, it got to a point. I was on the phone with a caller, and I was on the show, and one thing led to another, and I see John on the phone with and he's just everything, and I said, got on the intercom. I said, what? Oh, it's Barb. She said that she can look. Tell her to get in the fucking car, go to the fucking airport, get into that fucking helicopter, and do the traffic. All right. Okay. And I go back to doing what I do, answering the phones, trying to record bits and callers and so on. And we had like 10 incoming lines and the hotline. So the hotline starts to ring. Oh, all right, well, let's see, what time is it? About 7:40. That means it's probably my son who's calling to tell me he's on his way to school and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Hey, Dad. Hey, son. Getting ready to shove off? Yeah, ready to go. You got everything you need? Yeah. No problems with the car? Got everything going. Okay, well, have it. Dad. Yes. Do you know what you just said on the air? I look down, and my mic light is still on from the main studio. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you very quietly turn off that microphone, and you say, thank you, son. Appreciate that, blah, blah, blah. Hang up. And then I started answering the phone. B104, hello. Do you know you just said that? Thank you. B104, hello. Ha, 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 you just said thank you. B104, hello. I want to talk to your manager. Oh, okay, hold. B104, hello. You can't believe what I just heard you say. So it was out there. And so he just went on, did the rest of the show, got off the air. Nobody said anything about anything. And then I got a call from the Baltimore Sun. And the media guy, who's still there, said, "Hey, I understand you taught your audience a few new words this morning." I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "But I really don't think my audience would be all that shocked to know that might be a word I would employ from time to time under extreme circumstances." And he said, "Well, are you going to apologize?" And that brings up an excellent point about radio in general and that particular moment in particular. I said, "No, I'm not going to apologize. Why? How can I apologize? If you heard it, you had plenty of opportunity to call and complain, call the FCC, laugh, tell your neighbors, do whatever it is you're going to do. And if you did not hear it, and I go on the air and apologize, I'm going to have to restage the entire incident. Hey, if you weren't listening yesterday at about 7:40, I said fuck 3 times on the air, and I'm really sorry about that. So if you were offended then, you're probably offended now. And it was stupid. I mean, there was no... And I explained that to the general manager when he read about it in the newspaper the next day. About the phone, DJ refuses to apologize for obscenities on the air. And he insisted I did, and I used the same argument with him. I said, how could I do that? How many people have called to say they were canceling their advertising? How many people have called and said they were reporting this to the FCC? How many people from the FCC have called? What's happened? Essentially nothing. A couple of mommies called, to complain to the receptionist, and, that was about it, but that was the end of the story. So, it just kind of went by. Nothing's been said about it since until I wrote about it in the book and spelled it all out. But it was, although you can probably go to Microfiche or someplace in the Baltimore Sun and see the column. I got a copy of it here, but
now that's by the way,
that's the way it came down. And,
that's all great, but Brian, that's not the story. The story is the timing of this.
I didn't know if I'd be able. I don't know that I can. I don't know if I can. I'll try to explain that.
I'll read the copy.
All right.
And you can insert. The management of the fantastic new Inner Harbor Hotel would like to welcome you to our newest luxurious accommodations. Great views of the harbor, great rooms and suites. And right now, as a thank you and welcome to the people of Baltimore, we're offering a special weekend celebration with special rates on rooms for just $199.
Let me back up for a moment and say that when I was called into the general manager's office, he was especially irate. Because he was absolutely convinced that I had that my little outburst on the air was done intentionally.
Well, absolutely. So special rates on rooms for just $199.
Yeah. Well, what no one knew was that there was a commercial play. I didn't even know this. There was a commercial playing when I was talking to John on the phone, and it says, "Get in the fucking car.
Relax in our Whirlpool tubs.
In the fucking airport.
Enjoy world-class room service.
And do the fucking traffic report.
And dine in any one of our 4-star restaurants, all for just $199 per person." Yes, so I adored that, yes. Rooms for just get on the fucking car. Because,
and he could not believe. That was the whole thing. The general manager believed when he heard the air check and heard these perfectly dropped in obscenities in the midst of these gaps in this soft sell commercial.
Right.
I'll bet you to this day, if you call him down in Florida, I think he's still alive. He would tell you, he absolutely did it. He absolutely did that.
Yeah, that was the part of it was just priceless. The timing on that was excellent, and that's the kind of radio I yearn to hear today.
And I wish, I almost wish when he said it, I wish I had planned it that way.
Right.
I wish I was that good.
Yeah.
But it would have required audio editing skills that I never had and don't have to this day, even with digital. It would have taken me hours to have put that together the way it actually sounded over the air. But I will say that sitting in his office listening to the playback of that, I got a pretty good laugh out of that. It turned out pretty well.
It was wonderful. Now, of course, these are the things for which I'll always love you, but the things that the industry will remember you for. When you started this, no one else was doing it, and I'm talking about Rink.
Yes. Well, when I made the quantum leap into hyperspace of talk radio, from when WABC flipped, and then doing the Brian and Bob with Bob Madigan in D.C., and then down to GST and blah blah blah. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talk radio much more than I did music radio. It was like doing music radio, but without the interruption of the music.
Right.
And I got my own political philosophy started to blossom with the aid of some books that I read and people whom I interviewed and so on, and it became a lot more exciting and attractive and mentally stimulating than just hitting a 12-second post with a spiffy innuendo that might make somebody blush. But I heard this commercial for ISDN internet service, the lines that we use in radio for the best audio fidelity, and came up with the idea that because talk radio is much more expensive to administer than any other format, because of the need to hire an actual brain like Miss James, for example, who can carry on a conversation with anybody about anything, that kind of talent costs money. And a lot of stations were willing to pay that. But then there came that point in time when that talent and that brain needed a little cooling off, called vacation. And now what do? We can't play 12 of 6 in a row. We can't call in the shrubbery doctor from the weekend landscaping show to do it. What the hell are we going to do? And a lot of stations were faced with that dilemma. So what they did was they imported talent that was either on the beach or on vacation or whatever, and brought them in and put them on the air in a non-competing market for their star who was gone. And that was okay, except that was also expensive. You had to fly them in, you had to put them up in the hotel, you had to get them a car, get them a woman, get them food, get them drunk, get them to the show, you get them, all the rest of that. And it got to be, and then you had to pay him for his brain and his talent. And so I discovered that with the internet, I could go online, I could see what's going on in Pahrump, or I could see what was going on in L.A. or San Francisco or Dallas or Charlotte or Kansas City or whatever, Philly, El Paso, San Antonio, and I could talk about local issues just as if I actually lived there. They're all pretty much the same. Government trying to run roughshod over innocent taxpayers and corrupt politicians lying and sleeping with and all the rest of that. So there's a certain common denominator that runs through all of that. But being outside of the logic-free zone of Washington, D.C., that helped a lot. So my geographical credibility played into it. So to make a long story an epic, or a book in this case, I developed Vacation Relief, which is what they called it when somebody was gone. Vacation Relief Incorporated. I got an ISDN line run to my house. I bought some moderately expensive equipment, and I notified a program director in WBAP in Dallas, the newly retired Tyler Cox, and the not-so-newly retired Jeff Beauchamp at WBAL in Baltimore, that I was offering this service, and they were thrilled to death, having just spent gobs of money bringing in high-priced talent from other markets to fill in for their high-priced talent that had gone on vacation. And I ran a few ads, and the next thing you know, I was getting calls from San Francisco, San Antonio, Austin, Charlotte, Kansas City, Minneapolis, St. Paul, New York, Baltimore, whatever. And, it might be a day because somebody was out with a root canal. It might be a week because somebody was on vacation. Or it might be like in Kansas City, I was only supposed to fill in for 90 days while they looked for a new morning show, and it turned out to be a year.
Sure.
I was doing this fill-in, and ultimately they offered me the job, but I wasn't going to make the leap to hyperspace into Kansas City.
Yeah.
But that was the way it went, and of course other people heard about it and read about it and imagined the success once they were able to conceptualize the idea, and then they started coming in behind me, and I was getting calls from program directors at client stations saying, I just got a call from Ferd Burfel who said he'd do what that guy Wilson does for half the price.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, you get what you pay for, and sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And so the 7-year gig that I had at KSFO in San Francisco disappeared for this schmuck, who was there and convinced Jack Swanson he'd do it for half. And he did, and, whatever. And they had some complaints and so on. But, it all comes around to the dollar. And that's the way it was. But for, 10, 12 years, the concept and the service was very, very good to me, and I was happy to know that I had conceptualized, developed, and actually put in practice something that revolutionized the way it was done for the time. Now, of course, things are fairly bad at a lot of mom and pop and even some major market talk stations, so they just do reruns of other syndicated programs, or they'll pill, some syndicated show that they have on the weekend.
Or the colon, right, the colon cleanse, yeah.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that is what it has come to. But for many years, and of course, today it can easily be done over the internet. But when you first started this meant having ISDN lines and all that expense, which I always had them because I was doing some national stuff. But for an individual talk show host to say, "Hey, I'm going to embark on this," it was revolutionary. I think in some ways, Rush Limbaugh broke that horrible operating logic of to relate, you've got to be local. Local equals being relatable. And of course it doesn't, as you proved time and again with Vrink, because like you say, you were on it whether it was Dallas in the morning and Minneapolis at night, and I know you had some days where it was 2 and 3 stations. Yeah, there was a period there towards the end of the last century. I did what would I do? I did mornings at Kansas City. I did middays, these mid-mornings for Mark on WBAP in Dallas. Then I did Ron Smith's show on WBAL in Baltimore from 3 to 6 Eastern. And then I did my KSFO San Francisco show from 7 to 10 Eastern time out there. That was 4 shows. It was 3, 6, 9, 12 hours for... I think it was 22 days from before Christmas till after New Year's. That was that's when I almost got out of the business. My brain was totally fried after all that. But what was interesting was, the idea was to be able to be local because everyone wanted to be local. But I had to be honest, that I wasn't there, that I was doing the show from, as I always said, the logic-free zone of Washington, D.C., and once that happened, the significance of the geography was such that all the people wanted to talk about were national issues. Right.
They didn't give a damn about the bond issue to build the new stadium in Dallas or whatever. That was that was irrelevant. That was more important to them was to be able to, because nobody could get through to Rush. If you ever called Rush, if you can get past the business, you were on hold for 3 hours, and he was so busy bloviating, you never got on anyhow, so it didn't matter. But to talk to somebody about national issues, actually be able to get on the air and feel good about yourself, that worked out. That worked out really well, and I was perfectly happy to talk about those issues rather than the school board in Plano.
Yeah. Any small market in America, what's the number one topic? The school board. And
that's right.
That'll never change. I should mention, by the way, you mentioned callers. We've had some, and I've ignored them all because I've been enjoying talking to you. So we have to have you back sometime to actually take calls, because I guess that was unfair that I did this. But 50 stories, 50 years in radio. So now that we're past 50 years, where are we going to hear you again, Brian?
I don't... Actually, to be brutally honest, I don't think you're going to hear me anywhere. I don't think that talk radio today, except in very, very, very select markets, would have any interest in having me on. My political perspective has very little in common with the left-right paradigm that is so prevalent in talk radio today. I'm certainly negotiable as far as money is concerned. That's just not an issue, for me anymore. I would do it more for the amazement of just being on the air and being able to engage with an audience, on these things. I have seriously considered, and I haven't totally ruled out, launching a podcast to put up on my website.
So give your website a plug right now.
Well, there's a couple. One is the Libertas Media Project that I started about 10 years ago.
Okay, and the URL for that is?
LibertasMediaProject.com.
Libertas Media Project, okay.
Yeah, and my personal website, BrianWilson.net, pretty easy to remember. Although I have to admit, I haven't been a good custodian of either one of those websites of late because of my effort to write the 50 stories, and kind of like anything else, once you get to that point, after a while, your brain just feels fried, almost like those 3 weeks of 4 stations. After a while, you just want to just walk away from the computer and microphones and keyboards and so on, and go out and do something mildly obscene. But those are the only. Nobody's beating down my door to come do a show for them on any basis, and that's okay. I'm not offended. I understand that there's an economy and and so on. But it isn't to say I wouldn't do it. But there are some things that I see in the headlines and read online and different websites and so on that seem to be crying out for a different perspective. And my beyond libertarian viewpoints now, I think, would be even more provocative than my previously libertarian perspective was the last several stations I was on. But I also think that that management and ownership, mainly, is scared of anything but the most predictable political commentary, unless you happen to be like, a certain someone I know who owns her own station, who can do whatever she wants. Back when I owned my own station, we could do whatever we wanted. But
we share that small L libertarian belief. And
yes.
One of my fondest memories was the night we spent in Baltimore with Larry Nichols.
Yes. Well, we did. We spent some nights together. Not to be salacious,
no.
I was just saying we spent. There was a dinner out on the West Coast.
Oh, yeah.
There was an evening in Washington. There was. We didn't physically get together, but I was on for. Who was I on for? I was on for somebody at one of your Philadelphia. So was it Dom Giordano?
Right. Yes, at PH2. Yes.
Did that, and but I do remember that time out on the West Coast. There was a little Fado dough for you, and you had on this really spiffy white outfit. And,
I think that was one of the Talkers confabs, and we got together with Stephen B.
It was.
Yeah.
Miss James and I share a lot of memories on other things that we weren't physically present for, but we both had a very close friend in Stephen B. Williams, an incredible talent.
Who's still my announcer, by the way. He still does my opens and closes.
Yes, that's the voice.
Yeah,
I love the man. We just went through a bit of a rearranging process here and came across a whole bunch of pictures of Stephen and my wife and some friends of ours that own a restaurant in New York and so on out in Napa Valley, and the times we spent together and when he came to New York, and I miss him. I miss him terribly. He's a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And may Harvey Morrow rot in prison. I think for many years Harvey thought he'd find a way to get away with it, but I think the truth has finally sunk in, and I hope he lives a very long life with absolutely nobody visiting him.
Well, I would add a few more things to the rot part, but that was just...
I know. Well, at the sentencing, I sent my comments, and they read them to the court. And California's most notorious prison, as far as being the place you don't want to be, because the bad guys, is Pelican Bay. And I had mentioned that, in my head, I heard Stephen saying at the sentencing, "Please let it be Pelican Bay." So.
Well, whatever, wherever, and however, it can't be bad enough.
No, I know.
For that guy and for what he did to one of the most wonderful people I ever. In all my, how old am I now? 28. All of my years that I ever met.
Well, me too. And that's the thing. Stephen didn't have a bad bone in his body, and I think I definitely got the best end of the deal in our friendship, because he was just as giving and, unfortunately, as honest and naive as it came, and that's of course what wound up getting him killed.
Yes, that was our last conversation. He was asking me about the circumstances, surrounding the financial aspect of that, and I sometimes feel a little badly that I didn't just jump on a plane and go out there. And
you and me both. And I also wish I had been aware that he was, going to be on the boat out on the way to Catalina when he confronted Harvey. Had I known that, I absolutely would have been there to say, "No, you're not."
My only second-rate comfort is that when he was here on the East Coast, and he was trying to break down some doors for voiceover work in Manhattan, as a going-away present when he went back to San Francisco or Napa Valley or wherever he was hanging out there at the time with Tom Davis.
Right.
I gave him a Ruger GP101 357 Magnum pistol.
Oh, how nice! Well, I sure wish he had had it with him.
Well, he had it, but he didn't have it with him. That was the most remarkable phone call. I was in Ohio a few years after his death, and I got a call from a local cop who said that a detective in L.A. had called wanting to speak to me. And that's kind of a three-corner billiard shot that's a little hard to imagine, Wait a minute, a detective in Los Angeles calls a detective in Ohio to talk to a talk show host in Toledo. I mean, this is a little strange. So I called the guy, and he was very nice and explained that he had been on the case of Stephen's homicide, and in the searching of their apartment had come across this handgun.
Yeah. And
they traced the serial number and everything to me.
Right.
And I said yes. I said it's mine. I gave it to Stephen as a going away present when he was blah 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 blah. And the remarkable thing was that he said, "Would you like it back?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, okay, yeah, I would." Well, needless to say, it never arrived.
Right.
But it was. I thought about that with him out there on the boat in the sky and so on. And did he not have the presence of mind to take that along as a life preserver?
I think it just never encountered. It never occurred to him that could have happened. But yeah, I know probably the guy at the sheriff's department who called you, and he was a great cop. He worked that case nonstop, and he came to me when I was living in Salt Lake City. He actually flew there, and when we were talking, he said, "You know, the difference is that I work murders every day, but this is one of the rare times that this is somebody who left people who really care for him, and we're going to make it right." And they did. You know, they did their end of it. It was the Avalon Station or Los Angeles County Sheriff.
Well, if I had a Wayback Machine, I'd like to go back to the time they busted the son of a bitch up there in South Dakota or
Montana. Yeah.
Montana, the used car lot or whatever.
Exactly right. That's exactly what it was.
Love to have been there when they walked in and said howdy. That would be That would have been sweet. But whatever.
Now,
just something that your host and I enjoy in common with the memories of one of the great guys, human beings and talent.
You betcha. Now, before I let you go, okay, a couple of people have been hanging on forever, and I am going to expose you to them. And one of them is a guy who called me for years in Philadelphia, and that's Nathaniel. So, Nathaniel, welcome. No, there you go.
So glad to hear. You know, I used to look forward to listening to you every night. When you were on WWDB.
Yeah.
And you sent me. I won a trivia question about Helen Keller one time, and you sent me a comic book and a CD. You know the group that did High Expressway to Your Heart? What was the name of that group?
Oh, you're talking about the Soul Survivors?
Yeah, you sent me a CD, and I must have played it until I couldn't hear it no more. I lent it to a friend, of course. I never saw it again, you know?
Yeah, well, it's good to hear from you. Now, were you a Brian Wilson fan? Did you spend time in Baltimore or Atlanta or New York?
Actually, I'm from Rochester, but I moved to Philly in '82. But I started listening to you, when you were on that other station, and I loved it because you used to play the "I Hate the Holidays."
Oh yeah, we still do that, Nathaniel. So all right, we do this every Friday night, and I want you to call me when we're playing trivia.
I would do that. I would do that.
All right, thanks.
So you're doing okay?
Yeah, I can't complain. Thanks.
Well, by the way, I'm one of the blacks who's a avid Donald Trump fan.
Good for you.
I don't know where you stand on that, but I am a Donald Trump fan.
Yeah, well, he beats all the alternatives, that's for darn sure.
Well, he has a spy, you know what I'm saying?
All right.
That's just so rare, you know what I mean? He has a spy, and I really respect that.
Well, I hope you will call me again and we'll play trivia.
Okay, all right, I will.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right, so, very nice.
All
right, so I thought that was going to be a Brian Wilson fan. I don't know how that happened, but, well, sometimes things happen. All right, so Bob in Tennessee, we'll try it again. Hello, Bob.
Well, I am on. I wonder what the heck happened last week. That was weird.
I don't know.
And just all of a sudden we dropped out. But I wanted to ask Brian this, since he's been in the broadcast business forever. What do you think the future of radio is? And do you think that that talk radio is going to be as prominent as it is today?
Well, it's a great question. I would venture a guess or an opinion that talk radio as we know it today will probably diminish. The Rush Limbaughs and Sean Hannity's and Glenn Beck's and Michael Savage's and all the rest of those guys will eventually fade to black. I don't mean that from a racial standpoint. But the people who back them will no longer be able to afford them, or the audience will get too litigious for them to stay on the air. But the good news is that the internet, shortwave, other outlets, kind of like the station that Miss James is running, will still be stations and outlets for hardcore information and communication that people who want to know will be able to go to and actually have dialogue.
Now, do you think some of the younger guys like Ben Shapiro and Tommy Lauren and all those, do you think that they might pick up the baton and run with it later on, or what do you think?
Well, I think the internet's going to, give everybody. I mean, if you got an internet connection, you can be a talk show host. You can do podcasts. You can do two-way. You can do pretty much anything you want, to the extent that you can find an audience, and it's an incredible spectrum, and obviously it's worldwide. But if you've got a message, if you've got a means, if you've got a talent, if you are sufficiently unique, I think, in your perspective, and there are people out there, I could name a few, but I won't, who are unique in the sense that they have a position, a perspective, a philosophy that is pretty much unheard of in the two-dimensional spectrum that is talk radio today. You're either conservative or you're liberal. And that's about it.
Yeah.
And you can pound on the podium, on the extreme left, the far left, the moderate left, the almost left, the far right, the alternate right, the midnight. They're all there's not a, how they always say, there's not a dime's worth of difference between Republicans and Democrats. And you could even say that there is probably not much difference in a Rachel Maddow or a Ben Shapiro. They're articulate, they're bright, but do they speak truth? Can you fact check them? My perspective is, are they speaking to freedom? Freedom is not an ism. You got all these different isms: fascism, capitalism, socialism, all the rest of that. Freedom is not an ism, and freedom is pretty simple. And if you speak to freedom, the principles of freedom, the individual, the inalienable rights, life, liberty, happiness, ownership of private property. That's pretty simple stuff. That doesn't require government shutdowns and 197 pages of bullshit, and legislation and so on. It's really very simple. Unfortunately, it does not support power. It doesn't support abuse. It doesn't support aggression, and so on. And I think that if anyone can get online or get a frequency and speak to that, why do you need a ruler? Why do you need, 585 people in a former swamp, now cesspool in Washington, to tell you what kind of gas you can burn, when you can own a firearm, what kind of weed you want to puff on, or what you do or do not want to shoot into your veins? These are all, pretty easy, pretty compelling, easily articulated questions and answers that, if they were part of the national dialogue, and more people could get away from the idea of statism, and and the fact that we have to have a government, we have to have rules, we have to have committees, we have to have all this nonsense telling us how we can live our lives. I can put my pants on, just like anybody else. I don't need anybody to tell me to do that. And so can you, and so can Rollye, and so can anybody else that's listening to this show. We don't need
Preach
crap.
it, brother. Preach it, brother. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Of course, it's true. You know, I'm with you so much on the internet. The problem, as you too well know, Brian, is that right now it so defies the law of supply and demand. It's free. You can get on it. You can be heard anywhere. But how do you let people know you're there?
Yeah, that's the big problem, and
that is.
And you're not going to get a whole lot of help in that area. You know, the people who oppose you are going to try and shut you down. The people who agree with you are more likely to try and compete with you than support you.
Right.
And once you get beyond those very simple considerations, then you start getting into those areas where you wind up with people with money who want to influence you one way or the other. People with money who want to put you down or shut you up or whatever. I mean, we're seeing that right now with Facebook and Google and so on. The censoring of opinions that are not that don't jihad with the political opinions of those organizations and so on. So they're being taken off or censored or whatever, and that's a difficulty. That's a big difficulty, and that may be the way that George Orwell's worst nightmares come true. Yeah. But in the meantime,
I agree.
I think it's really a matter of word of mouth, and spreading. That's really the only way I know how to do it. I suppose you could invest a couple of bucks. And maybe buy a few ads or
but where and how?
And start off slow and not be too radical, kind of be nice, and then when nobody's looking, bring the hammer down. Really start talking about hardcore. But I think podcasts,
Brian,
are about the only way that you're really going to be able to get to the inquiring mind, and that to me is probably even harder than anything else. You're dealing with a shrinking population of people who got an education. The northern end of the baby boomer demographic, and by the time you get down to the millennials, they don't know, don't care, don't want to know, and if you say something that they don't like, they're going to run out of the room screaming with their fingers in their ears, and it's really tough to educate somebody in a situation like that.
That's true. Well, you're talking about internet and promoting radio on the internet. I have just started being a part of an internet radio show. I'm the executive producer of Back to the Hop on Top Shelf Oldies.
Good for you, Top Shelf Oldies. All right, Brian, this is a fella, Tim, who has a little radio a URL where it's 24-hour obscure oldies of various types. So what show will you be on, Bob? Producer?
It is Back to the Hop.
And when is it on?
With Clark Davis.
All right. And when is it on?
And we're on from 8 till 10 p.m. on Saturday nights.
All right, Saturday nights 8 to 10. Back to the Hop, Clark Davis, and that's topshelfoldies.com.
Right.
Okay.
And then I'll let you go, but next week I'll get on and talk to you about some of the changes that are happening at WLNG.
All right, I'll look forward to it.
And Brian, it's great to meet you on the phone, and you take care, and it's good talking to you.
Thank you, sir. Best of luck with your show.
Yeah. All right. Now, Rick in Florida has a Brian question. So, all right, Rick.
Hi, how's it going, Raleigh? I'm not in California tonight. I'm in Florida visiting.
Very good.
But I wanted to ask Brian a question here because I listened to his interview on another internet radio station, which was Rewound Radio. He did an interview about several weeks, maybe a month ago, I forgot. But I do want to follow up on a question on the statement he made about, because I listened to him on KSFO, and he mentioned about following Michael Savage for 7 years, and he made a comment like, and I'm just interested, he's a very strange guy, and I want to know how strange is he? I've listened to him since he was on day one.
Well, first let me predicate my answer with the fact that I did that show for all those years from a studio that was formerly known as a bedroom in a farmhouse on a farm I owned in upstate New York. And every few months, Jack Swanson, the station manager, would fly me out there so that the sales people could drag me around to sponsors and so on and let them know that there was a real live human being behind the voice, and we did different appearances and so on. So against that background, I actually I got to do the show from the KSFO studio, and that's where I ran into Savage. And while he was notorious for all the things I'm sure you're aware of, but what I remember most was the first time I met him. First of all, he's short, which is not particularly unusual in any line of work, but he was short. And he would come in wearing hospital scrubs.
Really?
And whatever hospital people wear, or whatever it's called, on their feet, little booty type things.
Those paper things?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was the physical Michael Savage. The personal Michael Savage was pretty acerbic. He was very like a lot of people, that are that become big time stars in the business, big time celebrities, personalities. He was very aware of his notoriety, and did not feel compelled, apparently, to extend any human consideration to other people in the room.
You cleaned that up nicely.
Thank you. You can hear the self-editing process
exactly.
going on here.
Well, yeah, because he's still alive.
Yeah. Well, there is that, and I don't know that he hasn't moderated over the years after having gotten his butt kicked a few times. But not a very nice guy in person. Well, on the other hand, I didn't find him to be a very nice guy on the air either. I mean, he was hooray for me and the hell with you, and I know everything and you don't. And I thought his show was incredibly poorly produced. It was just non sequiturs and overmodulations and things that just made no sense whatsoever. But he was number one in afternoon drive in San Francisco, was up until the time he left to become syndicated from KSFO, and more power to him. But the interesting thing was, as I found out later, one of the reasons KSFO didn't have a whole lot of trouble letting him go was for all of his numbers. I think he had like a 7 share or something like that in afternoon drive, which is,
can't fight with
for those
that.
of you not in the business, that's pretty large for a market like San Francisco. They couldn't sell him. They couldn't sell the numbers. They could, but nobody wanted to be on the show. Everybody found him just as obnoxious and off-putting as I did.
Well, yeah, that's.
But they listened to him the same way. I guess you stop and look at a flat tire or a car wreck or something going down the road, and so he managed to capitalize on all that in the sense that the station paid him very nicely to be there, but eventually got to the point where he. I guess they couldn't justify the expense on the basis of how he was able to translate those numbers into actual sales.
Yeah, it's interesting because controversial radio, talk radio today is like we were talking earlier about rock and roll. In 1960, advertisers wouldn't buy rock and roll. Well, now national advertisers will tell you right out in the buy that it can't be anything controversial.
Yeah, that's true. I'm on the list.
Anybody
Stern's on the list. You're probably on the list. Anybody that's ever done anything that got themselves written up in the newspaper for the wrong reason is on the list. And for those of you not aware of such things, is that people like McDonald's or whatever, they don't want their commercials run in or near
right.
a jock or a talk show host who's going to who's going to make comments that could be offensive to little snowflakes out there that don't know that life is real and life is earnest. So I don't know how that's impacted Savage. Last I heard, he was getting death threats for something. But,
I heard that too, that he was moving to an undisclosed location or something.
Yeah, like Mark Levin. It's okay. The last thing you want to do is laugh at something like that, and the next day you find out the guy was beaten to a pulp.
Right.
I don't. I hold no animosity toward him whatsoever. I mean, it was just an observation. I didn't do anything to support his show. I couldn't pre-promote anything about him since I came on after him. He sure as hell didn't do anything to pre-promote mine or anybody else's. Right. He was the singular entity on that station as far as he was concerned, and that was pretty much the way it was. But that's not all that different from lots of other major market stations that have major market egos and major market problems in that particular area. It's just the nature of the business, and you put up with it or you get out.
That's it. So anything else, Rick?
Yes. Well, you brought up a point here, too, where with AM radio, the doldrums that it's been facing, would they rather air an Air America or a Bryant or what was his name, Cuomo? Even Jerry Brown once had a talk show which was based out of Oakland, and nobody in the Bay Area even carried it. And you may get lucky if you're in West Palm Beach with Randy Rhoads, who maybe won one book over Rush. And they all have dismal ratings every time you put them behind a mic in a talk show that is anything from liberal to even center to left. I mean, doesn't the sponsor see that, hey, we may find so-and-so offensive, but his numbers are there. We find somebody very nice, or who was that other guy, he passed away a couple of years ago, left-wing talk show host who knew Hannity very well. I forgot his name.
Alan Colmes.
Yeah, they had no numbers. Why would radio commit suicide like everything else you could say out these days as far as the country goes? I mean, committing financial suicide. What is that? What is the purpose of that? What else is AM going to put on besides brokers and preachers and you know what I'm saying? Things that aren't going to make you ratings and money.
Well, yeah.
I suppose there's any one of 10 or 20,000 answers for that, depending upon what somebody's motive is. My personal belief is that regardless of frequency, if you have a compelling, entertaining, informative act, that you can put on the air, you're going to get an audience.
Absolutely. All right, Rick, thank you for calling.
That's it.
Sure.
You don't need any more than that.
No,
it's nice to have a big owner behind you and lots of sponsors. They're going to spend $1 zillion, but they're just like lobbyists on K Street. They expect to get their pound of flesh. They expect to exert their influence over your show content, and you're going to have to deal with that.
Oh yeah, and in the discussion of AM, FM, XM, or Internet, that's a discussion about the delivery truck. All I ever care about is what's on it. And
I'd love to be. In fact, I did a show I took over Mark Davis's show. He wanted to be syndicated out of WBAP when ABC owned it,
right.
And so they gave him a show on 125, channel 125 on XM Sirius. Now the Patriot channel,
right.
With probably a lot more penetration than it had back in the day. It was live at 125, and it was kind of heady, knowing that you were on, around the world, on this satellite. But it was also rather depressing, knowing that you were talking to nobody except truck drivers that were hauling across the country. So it was, but it's. I still believe, though, that it would take a while. But if you've got like you just said, if the truck's delivering good stuff, you've got something. You've got something.
That's the key. You betcha. Well, in the meantime, we've got 50 stories, 50 years in radio, and I've got a link at Rollye.net, and I'm going to add a link to your website, Brian Wilson, and .net, and not any other Brian Wilsons, brianwilson.net. And are you planning to write more?
I put out those 2 books, Watercolor Memories and the 50 Stories, almost back to back, and I would, I've been noodling about a novel of a particular genre. The short answer to your question is yeah.
Okay, good.
The longer answer is I don't know what.
Yeah.
I find writing is at least as satisfying as speaking. It just has a longer shelf life, and I would like to say, yeah, I'm going to do more writing, but I don't know what. I've thought about just doing. You've probably seen Tom Sowell does a column every once in a while, called Intemperate Thoughts or something like that, where he just writes these one-liners or two-liners or three-liners that are remarkably insightful commentaries on politics, the passing parade, or some philosophy or personality. And it's almost like on Facebook, where you can sit there and take a few shots and get off and be done with it. So it may be something like that, but I don't think I'll be tackling another 10, 15, or 25 stories about radio again anytime soon.
No, I would, yeah.
Until, like you say, until a few people die. And I've already written the Watercolor Memories was my one shot at whatever that was or is. And if I find something I can get wrapped around, yeah, I'll definitely write it. Same thing like being on radio. If I have if an opportunity presents itself, I'll be all over it like white on rice. But right now, I'm just kind of waiting, letting my brain cool off and my fingers get their feeling back in them from all the work it took to get those 50 stories out and redone and tweaked and all the rest of that.
Yeah. Yeah, easy to read, not easy to write. That's for sure. Yeah. But you also have a Facebook presence, and so for individuals on Facebook, they can just take a look at you and just search for Brian Wilson. Will come up, or Libertas Media Project will come up, and you certainly make some political points known there in a very succinct way.
Well, that's the idea. I guess you could look at it as that's my outlet for those things that I don't have a show to do on, or you could say it's trolling. That maybe some program director or station owner or something would see that and say, boy, that guy's got an interesting take on things. Maybe we ought to get him on here for a few days and see what happens. But whatever. Right now I'm just doing it for my own catharsis and my own enjoyment, and tweak people and drop little bombs of thought along the way to try and stimulate some thinking and see what happens.
And you do.
Best.
And you do.
Yeah.
No, this is terrific. I thank you for spending your Friday night with me. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Matter of fact, since we're probably getting close to a point where you have to push the button, I have a question for you.
Okay.
This is something that has bothered me, made me itch for a number of years. I've never. It finally dawned on me when I knew we would be talking. I said, well, if anybody could answer this question, the all-time heavyweight champion goddess of everything rock and roll, can answer this question. Back in the early 60s, there was a rendition of Pomp and Circumstance, kind of a Dixieland thing, that WABC would play several times over the period of weeks that high schools and colleges were graduating, from like the middle of May till the end of June. And I've never been able to find a copy. or the artist or whatever, but it was the highlight of, well, at least my graduating class, when we would come out of high school at 3:00, and Dan Ingram, would throw that thing on WABC, and that's all. It was a total instrumental. Like I say, Dixieland thing. It did have a chorus at the end. No more pencils, no more books, no more teachers.
No, I can't help you.
You are it. Well,
no.
Your assignment, should you choose to accept it, would be.
I know. I will try not. I was not a WABC fan. I was a WMCA fan.
Let me just say, it was not to my knowledge. It was not exclusive to WABC. As a matter of fact, it was a guy who had been a former music director.
Okay, so why do I want to think of this guy? There is somebody I'm thinking that they might have used, but let me think of his name, because I will. Oh gosh, because when you say that, it was. Oh God, who was it? It was involved with the Everly brothers of the all things, and I think it might have been Don Everly. He was using a name, Adrian Kimberly, and he recorded it. And it has that in it. It has the no more pencils, no more books, no more teachers' dirty looks. So I would think Adrian, Adrian Kimberly, and which is really Don Everly.
Is that something that I'll obviously find out within nanoseconds of hanging up, but I'm assuming that would be something that would pop up on the internet somewhere.
Well, I'm trying to look right now. Adrian Kimberly, Pomp and Circumstance. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is on Calliope. That was the label. So let's see. I'm doing this on a laptop, but I'll bet you that's your record right there. 'Cause let's see.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it? Okay.
Yeah, you can tell by the intro.
Right.
Yep.
Well, that's what that was. It was Calliope Records. It was called the graduation song, Pomp and Circumstance. And it said adapted by Adrian Kimberly, but Adrian Kimberly was Don Everly.
Excellent. See, I knew you could do it.
But I had no idea WABC played it.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody else did. What I started to say was there was a guy who was in the traffic department at WRC in D.C. back there in the early 90s who had been in the music department at some other station somewhere along the line, and I just happened to mention it to him offhand because it was that time of year, and I thought it would be cool if Bob and I played it, and he knew exactly what it was and said he'd get me a copy, and then he disappeared.
Ah, well,
so it was one of those near misses, that came along. But,
it's on YouTube. You'll have no problem. And if you want the 45, I'm sure Val Shively has it.
No doubt. Well, I'm going to go get it, and then who knows where I'll be come May, June of next year, and be able to surprise everybody with that little number.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brian, I want to do it again.
Anytime you're ready. It's been a hoot. Always fun yapping with you, and especially going back to some of these great memories and so on. Anytime you're up for it, I'm here.
Good deal, and thanks for writing it. Again, very easy to read, but I know what it takes to write it, and that was no easy work, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right, we'll talk soon.
You bet.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so Brian Wilson and BrianWilson.net. I will get that up on the website. 50 Stories, 50 Years in Radio. Like I say, on what is it? Amazon. You can read it on Kindle for free. That's if you read anything on Kindle. But if you're like me, you have to have a copy to have and to hold, and I do, and it won't set you back much, and you can get that on Amazon as well. Now, on that note, until next Friday at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific, and 12:13 in Iowa, that's a wrap.